Welcome to the Classic Science Fiction channel. Today we're diving deep into Dieselpunk, a really fascinating retro-futuristic world that's, sparks so much creativity.
Yeah.
I've got a great collection of sources here looking at, well, everything from its early mentions to how it shows up in all sorts of cool places. Think of a world powered by grit and gasoline, where the styles of the past collide with a vision of the future that never quite happened.
Exactly. And Dieselpunk isn't just about looking cool, though it often does. It's really about exploring a very specific moment in our imagined history. Our deep dive today will try to uncover where this whole idea came from, what makes it unique, and why it continues to capture our imaginations across books, films, games, and even how people express themselves.
Okay, so this blend of old and new.
Yeah.
Where did the idea for Dieselpunk actually originate? It feels like it has such a distinct flavor.
Yeah. That distinct flavor started to get a name back in 2001 when a game designer, Louis Pollack, used Dieselpunk for his role-playing game Children of the Sun. But the ingredients, the aesthetic, that was being mixed much earlier. It's often considered a kind of spin-off from cyberpunk.
Ah, right, cyberpunk.
Yeah.
The high-tech, low-life future stuff from the 80s.
Exactly. Cyberpunk looked at a near future dominated by tech, often with that rebellious edge. Dieselpunk kind of takes that same spirit, that punk attitude, but looks back to a different era.
So where cyberpunk imagined a gritty, high-tech future, Dieselpunk reimagines a gritty but technologically distinct past. Is that fair?
Precisely. That punk part signifies a similar countercultural energy. Yeah. A way of looking at things with a critical eye, maybe a dissatisfaction with the present, and a desire to forge individual expression. In Dieselpunk, this often means reimagining a past that could have been often darker.
And the diesel part really anchors it, right, to
Yeah.
a specific time.
Absolutely. The Diesel Age. That's generally seen as the period from, say, the Jazz Age through the Second World War, and maybe stretching into the early 1950s. This was when diesel power really took over from steam in many Western nations, driving transport, industry, and, of course, warfare.
That era has such a strong visual identity already.
Yeah.
So how does Dieselpunk carve out its own space compared to, well, the obvious one, Steampunk? They both play with the past.
That's a really great point to clarify. Steampunk, typically looks to the 19th century Victorian era. Steam power, clockwork, brass goggles, often with a more optimistic, maybe whimsical feel.
Yeah, lots of elaborate inventions.
Right. Dieselpunk, though, dives headfirst into the first half of the 20th century. It embraces a darker, more industrial vibe. Think about the interwar period, the Great Depression, the rise of fascism. That whole period overshadowed by World War II, where steampunk might have polished brass. Dieselpunk often features heavy steel, powerful engines, the raw energy of combustion.
So less about intricate gears turning by steam and more about massive pistons firing with diesel.
Exactly. And while steampunk can have that Victorian sense of wonder and progress, dieselpunk frequently carries a more noir, sometimes even dystopian feeling. It reflects the anxieties and the very real conflicts of its chosen time period.
Interesting. Were there hints of this kind of aesthetic, this feeling, even before the term Dieselpunk was coined?
Oh, definitely. Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis is often pointed to as an early touchstone.
Metropolis, yes.
Its stunning futuristic cityscapes, that fascination with massive, almost overwhelming machinery, it resonates strongly with dieselpunk themes. Even though they didn't call it that then, you see that same awe, but also unease with technology.
That makes perfect sense. That film has such a powerful, almost crushing mechanical feel to it. So when did Dieselpunk really start to solidify as, a term people used?
It really gained traction in the 2000s. There was an article discovering Dieselpunk in the Gatehouse Gazette back in 2008 that was pretty influential in defining it, especially setting it apart from the already established steampunk scene. Then as we moved into the 2010s, you saw online forums, specific events that really helped solidify Dieselpunk as its own distinct subculture, its own identity.
It's fascinating how these niche ideas can grow into such vibrant communities online and offline. And it sounds like there's a general understanding of where the Dieselpunk period, ends.
Yes. Generally, the cutoff point is considered around the end of World War II or maybe the very early 1950s. The aesthetics and the tech focus of the Cold War era that followed, atomic power, space race optimism, that sleek mid-century modern look that belongs more to the related but distinct subgenre of atompunk.
Right, atompunk. Got it. Okay, so we have a good sense of its history and definition. Now, how does Dieselpunk actually manifest in the stories we tell? Can you give me some examples in, say, literature?
Oh, sure. Dieselpunk has fueled some really compelling narratives. Looking back, even before the term was common, Len Deighton's 1978 novel SSGB, it imagines a 1940s Britain occupied by Nazi Germany. That have that strong sense of an altered, gritty historical reality that's key to Dieselpunk. And of course, Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle from 1962, set in a world where the Axis powers won World War II, it absolutely captures that dystopian mood you often find in the genre.
Wow, yeah. Those both sound like they explore some pretty unsettling alternate realities. A lot of what-ifs about WWII.
They do, and that's a really common thread, especially the Nazis one trope. Robert Harris's Fatherland from 1992 is another great example, a thriller set in a Nazi-dominated Europe of the 1960s. But Dieselpunk isn't only about that. Scott Westerfeld's Leviathan series, starting in 2009, that's more young adult adventure, set during an alternate World War I.
Oh, interesting. How does that work?
Well, it has these giant mechanical war machines, sort of walkers, powered by diesel. That's the Dieselpunk part. But it also features genetically engineered creatures used by the opposing side, which blends in elements of biopunk. It's a really cool mix. And you see similar themes exploring alternate WWII scenarios in novels like Alan Glenn's American Eagle, Philip Roth's The Plot Against America, and Guy Seville's The Africa Reich. Lots to explore there.
That's a fascinating range, from grim thrillers to YA adventure. What about in the world of comics? That seems like a natural fit visually.
Absolutely. Comics have really embraced the visual potential. The Rocketeer is probably the classic example here.
Oh, yeah. The helmet, the jetpack.
Exactly. Even though it came out before the term was widely used, and people often link it to decopunk, which is like a sleeker, more Art Deco influenced style within Dieselpunk, it just perfectly captures that era's aesthetic, combined with exciting advanced tech. Other comics like Half Past Danger get cited a lot for their Dieselpunk feel. You can even argue for elements in Hellboy maybe, and the visual style of the Goon definitely has those deco undertones.
And Batman.
The animated series.
The animated series, yeah. It had such strong neo-noir and Art Deco elements that visual language definitely resonates with the decopunk side of things.
The Rocketeer is such a visually iconic example, that blend of retro style and cool gadgets. Okay, what about movies? This seems like a genre just made for the screen.
It really is. Film is fantastic for showcasing the Dieselpunk aesthetic. We already mentioned Metropolis as a kind of foundational text. Things to Come from 1936 is another early one, with those grand utopian and dystopian visions. The 1991 Rocketeer movie, of course, brought that decopunk energy to a wider audience. Dark City from 1998, while maybe more gothic sci-fi, definitely have that shadowy retro-future noir atmosphere that fits.
But is there like a definitive Dieselpunk movie?
I think many people would point to Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow from 2004.
Ah, yes. With the giant robots. Exactly. Set in an alternate 1930s, it's just brimming with advanced tech flying robots, laser weapons, massive flying aircraft carriers, all rendered in this gorgeous Art Deco style with a classic pulp adventure, almost noir sensibility. It's like stepping right into a vintage sci-fi magazine cover.
Sky Captain is such a visually stunning film, really unique. What other movies capture that kind of spirit, maybe even partially?
Well, you can definitely see Dieselpunk influences in Captain America, the first Avenger, the 2011 one, the whole World War II setting combined with Hydra's advanced weaponry and vehicles.
Right, the Red Skull's tech.
Precisely. Then there's the more, shall we say, out there stuff like Iron Sky from 2012.
Moon Nazis.
Moon Nazis, exactly. It's a wild sci-fi comedy where Nazis escape to the moon in 45 and come back in 2018. It mixes that Nazi-era design with futuristic space tech, kind of a Dieselpunk parody, really, even something like Mad Max. Fury Road, while post-apocalyptic, has a strong Dieselpunk vibe and its heavily modified, patched-together vehicles, and that raw industrial aesthetic focused on gasoline.
That's an interesting connection I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, and Sucker Punch from 2011 has those dream sequences, particularly the World War I scenes that blend steampunk and dieselpunk elements. Terry Gilliam's Brazil often gets mentioned, too, with its retro-futuristic tech and bureaucracy. And you absolutely have to mention the Indiana Jones series, especially Raiders and Last Crusade.
Gandhi, of course.
Set in the 30s, the pulp adventure feel, the Nazi villains, secret societies, those hints of maybe prototype technologies. It strongly evokes a dieselpunk atmosphere, even if it's not explicitly sci-fi.
It's amazing how diverse the examples are, from serious alternate history to outright fantasy and comedy. Okay, what about video games? That seems like a perfect playground for these kinds of imaginative worlds.
Oh, completely. Games are ideal for building these immersive dieselpunk worlds. The Crimson Skies series, which started way back in 1998, is a fantastic example. Set in an alternate 1930s age of aviation,
Air pirates.
air pirates, exactly. Flying pirates, incredible Art Deco-inspired airships and planes, lots of pulp action. It's pure dieselpunk fun. Then you have the Wolfenstein series, especially the more recent ones. They've really leaned into that Nazis 1 dieselpunk subgenre with terrifying high-tech Nazi war machines, giant robots, armored super soldiers, retro-futuristic weapons, all in that alternate WWII setting.
Yeah, those games have a very strong, very oppressive look.
They do. And the BioShock series, while technically set in 1960, the first game especially has such a powerful dieselpunk and decopunk atmosphere.
That's right.
Rapture, that underwater city, the stunning Art Deco architecture everywhere, the 1940s jazz music playing, that mix of advanced genetic tech with very analog, almost clunky older technology.
Yeah,
It creates this incredible ambiance. It leans heavily into decopunk, that sort of decayed glamour.
that makes sense. What else?
Even the Fallout series, which is mostly considered atompunk because it's post-nuclear 50s aesthetic, has elements in its pre-war designs and technology, the look of the cars, the architecture, some of the robots that definitely share some DNA with Dieselpunk. And you see influences pop up in other games too, like Greed Corp, Gatling Gears, Skullgirls with its art style, Iron Harvest with its WWI mechs, and even some people read parts of Final Fantasy VII, like Midgar, as having Dieselpunk elements.
Wow, it really is a versatile aesthetic. It sounds like creators can use it in so many different interesting ways. But it's not just confined to these fictional worlds, is it? You mentioned subculture earlier. How does it show up in like real-world popular culture?
That's right, yeah. Dieselpunk has definitely spilled out into the real world, particularly through music and the growth of a dedicated subculture around it. Musically, the dieselpunk scene really embraces the actual sounds of the diesel age. We're talking jazz, swing music from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, ragtime, blues. You'll often hear that authentic period music at dieselpunk events. Unlike steampunk, where the musical connection can be a bit more constructed, dieselpunk has this rich, genuine soundtrack ready-made.
So you're likely to hear, I don't know, Glenn Miller alongside the clanking of imagined machinery at a Dieselpunk gathering.
Absolutely. And more recently, electro swing has become huge within the community.
Yeah, electro swing. I've heard that.
Yeah, it blends those classic swing and jazz melodies with modern electronic beats. It's a fantastic way of taking that vintage sound and giving it a contemporary, danceable edge. Fits the retro future vibe perfectly. There are even online radio stations like Electro Swing Revolution Radio that cater specifically to this taste. And, while not strictly diesel punk, shows like Peppermint Candy on Jazz FM here in the UK help keep alive the kind of music that forms the backbone of the subculture sound.
That sounds like a really cool way to immerse yourself in the era's mood.
Huh.
What about fashion? Does Dieselpunk have its own distinct style that people actually wear?
Oh, it absolutely does. Diesel punk fashion is all about reinterpreting clothing styles from that 1920s to 1940s period, but often with a modern twist or a rugged edge. For men, you'll see a lot of things like fedoras, sharp suits, maybe suspenders, workwear elements, and definitely military-inspired jackets or trench coats. For women, you might see nods to flapper dresses from the 20s, the pin-up styles of the 40s, aviator jackets, tailored suits, and again, details drawn from military uniforms, epaulets, sharp cuts, that sort of thing.
So, compared to steampunk's often elaborate Victorian or Edwardian looks, Dieselpunk is maybe more streamlined, more functional.
Generally, yes. It tends to be less ornate, maybe more realistic in a way, reflecting that grittier, more utilitarian feel of the interwar and WWII era. While it's not all military cosplay by any means, the clean, sharp lines of military fashion from that time are definitely a big inspiration for things like trousers and jackets.
So less lace and corsets, more sharp tailoring and practical, maybe even tougher elements.
Exactly. But there's also the other side, influenced by Art Deco's elegance. You see that reflected too, sometimes in shiny metallic fabrics, geometric patterns and accessories. That represents the more glamorous deco aspect of dieselpunk. There's even terms some people use decadence, like deco plus decadence.
Decadence, okay.
Yeah, it describes a kind of fashion trend within dieselpunk that tries to mix that high society glamour with a hint of something darker, maybe moral decay or post-apocalyptic wear and tear. Think pairing a really stylish 1930s ball gown with, I don't know, rugged, beat-up combat boots. That kind of juxtaposition.
That's a really evocative image. It sounds like there's a strong sense of community around actually doing this, dressing up, getting together.
There really is. Events and community are vital for self-expression in these subcultures. You have dedicated groups like the North Texas Dieselpunks SA in Australia, and others in places like Brazil and Argentina that organize meetups, workshops, costumed events. And even at larger steampunk conventions, you'll often find dieselpunk-themed areas or specific programming. Like the Asylum Steampunk Festival in the UK has a decadence night, focusing specifically on the music and fashion of the 1920s to 50s. And of course, since the late 2000s, the internet has been huge. Online blogs, magazines, podcasts dedicated to dieselpunk, they've really helped solidify it as a genuine lifestyle subculture, connecting enthusiasts globally.
It's fascinating how these shared passions can create such vibrant and tangible communities. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into the visual language itself. What are the key aesthetic, fashion, and maybe architectural hallmarks of dieselpunk? You've touched on some already.
Right. The dieselpunk aesthetic really draws heavily from the major art, design, and architectural movements of that 1920s, 1940s period. We're talking Art Deco, streamlined modern, Bauhaus, constructivism, futurism, even touches of surrealism sometimes. And visually, it incorporates the feel of jazz and swing music, the look of those old pulp magazines, and definitely the shadows and angles of film noir.
So architecturally, it's that bold, geometric look.
Very much so. Art Deco and streamlined modern are dominant, especially in dieselpunk cityscapes. Think of those iconic, towering, stepped-back skyscrapers like you saw in the 20s and 30s. Sleek, rounded, futuristic-looking buildings, lots of chrome detailing on machinery, neon lights, bold geometric motifs. It really echoes those visions of the city of the future from the 1920s World's Fairs or, again, Metropolis.
So imagine the Chrysler build, maybe amplified or part of a whole city built like that.
Exactly, something along those lines. And within dieselpunk design, you often see sort of two main approaches, or maybe two ends of a spectrum. One approach really emphasizes the opulent, stylized, elegant designs of the era, those grand Art Deco buildings, luxurious transatlantic liners, sophisticated streamlined trains and stations, very glamorous. The other approach takes a darker, harsher turn. It highlights the grittier side of industrialization, the imposing nature of war machines, more rundown, tough urban environments.
And this is where decopunk and dieselnoir come in, those terms you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. Those terms are often used to try and differentiate these two vibes. Decopunk tends to be the shinier, maybe more optimistic, retro-futuristic vision. It revives that high society glamour of the 20s and 30s, think lively jazz clubs, ritzy casinos, flapper fashion, classic cars, but maybe amplified with futuristic extravagance. Diesel Noir, on the other hand, focuses on the decay and conflict of the same period. Those dimly lit, rain-slicked night streets, dangerous gangsters, smoky detective offices, the oppressive atmosphere of industrial factories, often with a more brooding, almost cyberpunk-like gloominess.
Okay, so two different but equally compelling ways of looking at that same core era through a speculative lens. What about the technology itself? It's clearly not just historically accurate tech, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. Dieselpunk technology is where the what-if really kicks into high gear. While diesel engines are central, obviously powering planes, cars, tanks, everything, they often have capabilities far beyond what was actually possible then. Think giant walking war machines like in Iron Harvest or some interpretations of WWI tech, massive flying fortresses that dwarf real bombers, powerful energy weapons like railguns or lasers, maybe even armored robot soldiers.
Like in Sky Captain again.
Exactly, those incredible flying robots, the laser weapons, those enormous airborne aircraft carriers. They are perfect examples of this imaginative tech. It's designed to look like the future, as it might have been envisioned back then in the 30s or 40s. That future of the past feeling is really characteristic. It makes dieselpunk a very clear manifestation of retrofuturism.
So it's about taking the technological hopes, but also maybe the fears of that period and just pushing them to imaginative extremes.
Precisely. And if you look at the details, like the color palette and materials, dieselpunk often contrasts with steampunk's warmer, earthier tones, like brass and wood. You tend to see cooler colors, lots of steel, gray, black, muted military browns and greens, reflecting that industrial grit and wartime feel. Chrome and steel are really prominent materials, often alongside early plastics like bakelite, which was common in that era for radios and appliances.
Interesting. So it feels colder, harder maybe?
Often, yeah. And you get this really interesting visual tension, this juxtaposition. You'll see sleek, aerodynamic Art Deco curves right next to the rough, purely functional, riveted steel aesthetic of wartime machinery. It creates a very distinctive visual language. Architecturally, depictions often include those grand, almost overwhelming cityscapes or massive industrial complexes, drawing inspiration for real structures like the Chrysler Building or Rockefeller Center. And those wartime machines, battleships, armored trains, V-2 rockets, that they often get scaled up, exaggerated, or reimagined in fantastical ways. Flying aircraft carriers, spacefaring U-boats, spider-legged tanks, technological fantasies born from the anxieties and ambitions of the time.
It's like taking the visual vocabulary of the 1930s and 40s and then asking, okay, but what if we could make it even bigger, faster, weirder, or more powerful?
That's a great way to put it. What if air travel had become even more dominant? What if war had taken even more outlandish technological turns? The visual answers designers and artists come up with for those questions really define the unique look and feel of Dieselpunk. It's about appreciating the style of the past, but also having the creative freedom to build an entirely new, imagined future from it.
This has been such a comprehensive look at the world, the look, the feel of Dieselpunk. But it's not just a fun aesthetic or a setting for stories, is it? Are there deeper academic or critical perspectives on why this subgenre resonates? Why people are drawn to it?
Absolutely, yeah. While it might not have the volume of academic study that, say, cyberpunk or even steampunk has, dieselpunk is increasingly becoming a subject of academic inquiry, particularly within fields like retrofuturism studies and alternate history studies. Scholars look at how dieselpunk narratives engage with those ideas of retrofuturism, imagining the future from the perspective of the past, and also retrophilia, that fascination with past eras. And the argument often made is that these subgenres aren't just simple nostalgia. They're not just about wishing we were back then. They also reflect a real curiosity about how people in the past envision their future. And importantly, they can offer pretty sharp critiques of our present.
How so? How does looking at a fictional 1940s critique today?
Well, think about those recurring themes in dieselpunk: the rise of fascism, the brutality of total war, economic depression, anxieties about technology. By exploring these issues in an alternate historical context, creators can comment on similar issues we might be facing today: political extremism, the impact of technology, economic instability, but maybe in a less direct, more metaphorical way.
So it's using the lens of a reimagined past to hold up a mirror to contemporary concerns. That's a powerful idea. What about that punk part of the name? We talked about the countercultural vibe, but how do academics interpret that specifically?
The punk element is often seen as crucial. It injects that sense of dynamism, that energy, that countercultural force. Theorists suggest it encourages that bold mixing of old and new aesthetics, embracing the speculative possibilities, and really allowing for a wide range of individual interpretations and expressions within the genre. It kind of positions dieselpunk as a postmodern space where individuals can build their own narratives and identities using the shared toolkit of the diesel age aesthetic, but maybe questioning or subverting some of its original contexts.
So it's not just about copying the past, but actively playing with it, maybe breaking it.
Exactly. And academically, it's also analyzed for its genre blending. Dieselpunk often mashes together science fiction, historical fiction, adventure stories, dystopian warnings, sometimes even horror elements. This hybrid nature makes it really interesting for genre studies, looking at how these categories blur. You also see comparisons drawn between steampunk and dieselpunk, analyzing how these related speculative fiction genres work, how they overlap, and how they both use alternate history differently.
It sounds like there's a lot more going on under the hood, so to speak, than just cool costumes and imagined gadgets. There's a real engagement with history, culture, and maybe even politics.
Precisely. And critical approaches often focus on that tension between nostalgia and critique within dieselpunk. Is it just looking back fondly, or is it doing something more critical? While the fascination with the past, the retrophilia, might seem like just nostalgic play, some researchers argue it can also represent a genuine admiration for the past's way of imagining the future, a fascination with their hopes and dreams, even if they seem naive or dangerous now. So dieselpunk can be seen as this creative practice that draws inspiration from the past without simply replicating it. It explores those alternative possibilities within history, often to shed light on our current world.
So those Nazis won scenarios, for example.
Yeah. Right, those common tropes like Nazis developed superior technology or the war never truly ended. They often work by exaggerating past fears and ambitions to comment on very modern concerns about technology, power, surveillance, perpetual conflict. So the argument goes, rather than just offering escapism, dieselpunk and similar alternate history genres can actually provide a kind of constructive criticism of contemporary society, making us think about the paths we didn't take and the paths we're on now. The academic conversation around dieselpunk is definitely growing. It tends to view the genre itself as this dialogue between modernity and postmodernity, between nostalgia and innovation. It reflects both an aesthetic appreciation for that machine age of the mid-20th century and a very postmodern subversion or reimagining of that aesthetic. Maybe a good way to sum up the core idea is something like borrow the past, rebuild the future. That really captures the essence of dieselpunk and why it's managed to carve out such a unique and compelling space in literature, art, games, and culture.
Wow. From its smoky industrial origins to its vibrant contemporary expressions in fashion and music and games, Dieselpunk certainly offers a rich and really multifaceted world to explore. We've really only scratched the surface today, I feel, but I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about this compelling blend of history, technology, and that underlying rebellious punk spirit. What aspects of this diesel-fueled alternate reality resonate most with you, listening now? What kind of stories or visuals spring to your mind when you think about it? We definitely encourage you to delve further into the sources out there, explore the vast landscape of dieselpunk in the books, the films, the games, and beyond. There's truly a whole world of gears, gasoline, and grand reimagined designs waiting for you to discover.